Once upon a time, there lived a heroic bear called Banjo, a rather loud bird called Kazooie, and an unpleasant witch named Gruntilda. The dynamic duo and villain were once stars of a franchise boasting expansive worlds to explore, fun power-ups, and colourful characters both friendly and hostile. Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Despite being named one of the best video game franchises of all time, the series has remained dormant for well over a decade. So what became of the bear, the bird, and the witch? They got into Smash Brothers! Wait, I think I skipped a few details. Name's Dave with MojoPlays, and this is the history of Banjo Kazooie. Sorry, I got a bit carried away. As surprising as it is, Banjo Kazooie didn't start out as a 3D platformer starring the bear and bird. In fact, the whole project was vastly different, almost unrecognizable when reflecting on the series that we've come to know and love. As UK-based developer Rare was winding down on the Donkey Kong Country series, the studio was fixated on starting work on their next big project. Project Dream was to be an epic RPG that utilized realized, digitized character models in the same vein as Donkey Kong Country. Well, realistic at the time anyway. However, it wasn't long before the game had to go through a drastic overhaul. Not only was the SNES incapable of processing Project Dream, but the industry was ready to move into the 3D world. And so, Rare shifted development of the game over to the N64 and began redesigning what they had.
It still had some of the elements that we had in Dream, but it was much more, it was a big sprawling kind of an RPG.
At some point during the transition, Rare decided to change Dreams' story too, changing it from fairy tale themes into a full-blown pirate adventure, where the protagonist Edison would clash blades with the evil Captain Black Eye. Alas, time would only come to prove that Dreams was not meant to last.
It was just simply too ambitious.
Rare's co-founder Tim Stamper felt like the boy hero had become a tired cliche. On top of that, Rare was still having problems getting Dreams to run properly on the N64. However, the final nail in the coffin came with the potential of Conker's 12 Tales, according to Rare alumni and composer Grant Kirkhope. The team behind the project managed to get the game running smoothly on Nintendo's new platform, while achieving the cartoon animations Rare had been aiming for. And thus, the dream was over.
From the start, the game was designed and built on the idea of an interactive cartoon.
To say that all was lost is an over-exaggeration, however. A cancelled game does not mean its ideas are forever dead, and Stamper knew that. With Dreams scrapped, Stamper went back through the designs of Dreams' animal characters to find a new protagonist for their project. While an anthropomorphic rabbit and Edison's dog Dingo were considered, Banjo ultimately made the cut.
And then we just kind of took Banjo out of Dream and then put him in the game that was eventually became Banjo. And
Dreams' character named Grunty the Giant would become Gruntilda the Witch. Piccolo, Banjo's girlfriend from Dreams, was redesigned into Tootie and became his little sister. Just when Rare thought they were making another platformer like Donkey Kong Country, they found themselves reworking the game yet again after being exposed to an early build of Super Mario 64. The team was so impressed that they decided to work their new game into a 3D platformer adventure, and they spent the next 16 months toiling away. Banjo Kazooie, released in North America on June 29th, 1998, and saw universal praise from both players and critics. Reviewers praised the imaginative worlds, technical prowess, and sound design. While Grant Kirkhope composed more than 100 songs for Project Dreams, some of his pieces would be reused for Banjo Kazooie, as well as several other Rare games. One of the most notable traits people loved about Banjo Kazooie was the character's speech. At one point, the team wanted to have complete voice acting, but quickly realized the game would be in development longer. Rare had considered using thought bubbles as well, but ultimately came to the conclusion of using chopped up sound bites for the character's speech. Despite being his first video game, this was not Banjo's debut in gaming. The bear had been a playable racer in Diddy Kong Racing a year before, alongside Tip Top the Turtle, who would also appear in both Banjo Kazooie and its sequel. Conker the Squirrel, who would become the infamously foul-mouthed rodent to trick parents into thinking he was kid-friendly, also made his debut in the game, but that's a story for another time. While most games around this time would see sequels a year and a half later, fans would have to wait a tad longer for the next Banjo Kazooie game. Banjo Kazooie would launch for the Nintendo 64 on November 20th, around 2000 for what critics had described as a nearly flawless game. Banjo-Tooie somehow took its predecessor's formula and made it bigger. New characters were introduced, worlds were bigger, puzzles were trickier, and we also saw one of the earliest examples of fast travel in games. In addition to new power-ups, and including Mumbo Jumbo as a third playable character, Banjo-Tooie incorporated a multiplayer mode formed around the various minigames played throughout the main game. Although there were plans for a co-op feature, where a second player could control a dead Bottles the Mole to possess enemies to troll the player, unfortunately Rare had enough on their plate during development and scrapped the mechanic. Banjo-Tooie would go on to sell over 3 million copies, nearly twice as much as its predecessor. With regards to Banjo Kazooie, the series would go through a rough patch during the turn of the century. After working with Nintendo for more than a decade, Rare anticipated the Japanese publisher to buy the studio. Alas, this wouldn't be the case. In 2002, Rare announced it had been acquired by Microsoft, and all projects shifted development onto the Xbox, aka one of the darkest eras in gaming history. This led to the cancellation of games that were planned for the Nintendo GameCube, such as Donkey Kong Racing, while a new Perfect Dark game and cameo Elements of Powers were brought over to the Xbox, though the former would become an Xbox 360 title. Despite the acquisition, Rare managed to make 2 more Banjo Kazooie games for the Game Boy Advance, with THQ as their publisher. Sadly, 2003's Banjo Kazooie Guarantee's Revenge and 2005 Banjo Pilot failed to find the same success as their console predecessors. While Rare did get to develop the Diddy Kong Racing remake for the Nintendo DS, Banjo and Conker were left behind, since the characters were now owned by Microsoft, and yet somehow Tip Top made it in. Regardless of Rare's departure from Nintendo, the future of Banjo-Kazooie was not dead, at least not yet. So there was the supposed Banjo 3E that was teased at the end of Banjo-Tooie. Truth be told, there kinda wasn't one. Instead, Rare began development in 2004 on what was known as Banjo X, a remake of the first game that would be approached the same way as Conker Live and Reloaded, where minor adjustments would be made to throw off returning players. One of these actions was to have Gruntilda interfere with the player's actions and make things harder. The idea would also be scrapped, as the AI was too complex for the time.
Prohibitive. We could foresee it was going to be really challenging to get the level of AI. So we kind of decided that wasn't for us.
Although, Rare failed to see any reason to continue the rest of the project, as the Xbox 360 would be launching the following year. When Rare migrated over to the new Xbox console, they began exploring more with the prototype that was being used during Banjo X's cycle, one that focused more on building carts. Thus, development for working title Banjo Kazooie began development after Grab by the Ghoulies launched in 2003, but never made it past prototyping due to the team having to help finish Cameo. The idea for a Banjo kart racer resurfaced sometime after the prototype was abandoned. Banjo Karting was Rare's second attempt and would approach the Mario Kart formula in various ways. On top of vehicle customization, the game would feature characters from other Rare properties, like Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark and Rash from Battletoads. Players could use a magic wrench to destroy or create structures, as well as dismantle pieces of enemy karts. Rare had managed to get a working build to show for Microsoft, but decided to cancel the project after learning about the development of Joyride, believing Microsoft wouldn't want to greenlight the project, when it already had a racing game in its portfolio. Still, Rare wasn't ready to give up on Banjo-Kazooie, and they certainly weren't ready to give up their car racing ideas. Many of the ideas from Banjo X, Kazooie, and Karting eventually became recycled for a brand new Banjo game, but this would be one heck of a stumble after its teaser announcement at E3 2006, as this made it seem like a new Banjo game was in the works. The idea of Gruntilda being an obstacle was revisited. This time, Rare wanted to design missions where both Banjo and Kazooie were completing the same tasks while the witch interfered. Some aspects of this feature would make it into the final game, but it wouldn't be as deep or as complex as initially conceived. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was an absolutely polarizing return for the Bird and Bear. While critics gave the game positive reviews, the fans were split. Some embraced the ideas of the game and enjoyed building vehicles, whereas others rejected, angry that it was nothing like the Banjo game they were teased at E3 2006. In 2019, nearly 11 years after Nuts and Bolts' launch, Kokop reflected on the game and defended its overall concept while stating that it should have been a brand new IP, not a Banjo-Kazooie game. Was Banjo-Kazooie responsible for putting the franchise on ice? One would not be blamed for suggesting that, as Banjo-Kazooie would go through more than a decade of silence. While the original N64 titles would be ported over to the Xbox Live Arcade and join nuts and bolts in the Rare Replay collection, it felt as though the industry was ready to leave the series behind. Most of the original Banjo-Kazooie team left Rare to form Playtonic Games and release their first game, Ukulele, in 2017. The rest of Rare would develop games for the Xbox Kinect, most notably Kinect Sports, and the release of the lackluster Sea of Thieves in March 2018. Just as fans were ready to give up hope, Nintendo would break the internet in 2019 by announcing Banjo and Kazooie were coming to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as a DLC fighter. History had been made! Ever since the first Smash Bros., fans have been clamoring for the bear and bird to make the roster. It could have happened for Super Smash Bros. Melee, but communications between the UK and Japan at the time were difficult. Banjo and Kazooie were added to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate on September 4th, 2009, setting a few records for the fighting game franchise. Not only were Banjo and Kazooie the first fighters from a Western franchise, but they were also the first fighter to be from a competing company with Nintendo. The duo's inclusion of the game would also be the first time director Masahiro Sakurai worked with a composer outside of Japan.
I was a bit worried about whether my directions would be understood, but he did an absolutely wonderful job.
Thanks to Banjo's inclusion of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, discussion surrounding the franchise's return has sparked. Sakurai encouraged the players to try the original game on Xbox One, and it's pretty funny. Character artist Steve Mayles has stated that the perfect way to reintroduce the franchise would be to remake the first two games, citing the successful return of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. Banjo-Kazooie may not have had as many games as those other legendary franchises, but the series has resonated with so many people that it's hard to ignore the love. The fans and developers would walk from Mumbo Mountain to Cloud Cuckoo Lane and back to see a new game. If there was anything to take away from the Smash debut, it's that the future has never looked brighter for the bird, the bear, and the witch. Be sure to check out this other recent clip from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.